and I'm here to convince you. Okay, I'll restart then. Here to convince you that best designs don't start with Figma. They start with a magnifying glass, a few whys, what's, and hows, and maybe a little paranoia as well. So here's the deal. In most of the design accounts that I've seen, everyone wants to rush to the solution. It's exciting, right? So as soon as you see a problem statement, you have some solution in your mind, and then probably you're biased towards that solution because that comes first in your mind as well. So today, what we are planning to do here is to remove that bias and try to look at what are we actually solving. The best teams, what they do in design accounts, they don't jump to the solution, rather they pause. Let me, yeah, they pause and they ask, wait, are we solving the right thing? Because solving the wrong problem beautifully is like putting the lipstick on platypus. Sylvia, right? So here's the truth bomb. I don't see my screen moving. There, there we are. So here's the truth bomb. Most of the disasters didn't fail in the prototype phase. They failed because no one actually stopped to ask if the problem was real, relevant, or misunderstood. Imagine you're designing better stairs for users who actually needed a ramp, or maybe a meditation app for people who don't believe in meditation. So it's a classic trap, right? Solution in search of a problem. So generally, when we come up with a solution and we try to fit into the problem statement and we look for problems around, if the solution fit into that cases as well. So let's try and avoid that in this protothon and perhaps in future after this as well. So let's look at some of the cases or some of um, case studies of design that has been done in the past and actual case studies out there in the industry. So let's start talk about Juicero, a Wi-Fi connected juicer that cost $400. So they got serious funding and media hype, but the users discovered that they didn't need a machine at all. They could squeeze the packets by hand, and boom, internet started roasting them. So what went wrong here, if we were to deep dive into the problem here, they solved for a smart kitchen gadget instead of users' actual job to get the fresh juice out very quickly and very easily. So the problem statement here was misunderstood, and probably the tech was involved to enhance the user experience and solve the issue that actually did not exist altogether. The team pretty soon realized that this was not a tech problem and it was a convenience problem, and they wanted to solve that, right? Very, very expensive lesson for the team. But then that's a good case study for us to learn what not to do going ahead in this program. Let's go ahead and look at another example, Clippy, right? You might have seen this on your MS Suite long back on your Word doc or on your Excel or any other application that you used to have, right? Our well-meaning but clingy paperclip friend. Clippy wanted to help, but instead it became the meme of the bad UX. Why? Because it jumped in too soon. It didn't wait for the users to ask. It assumed that help was needed by the user, and it never learned from that, right? So from the user behavior, based on understanding of how the users react to the help that was offered by Clippy. So this is where the product failed to understand the user's intention of using Clippy or enabling Clippy while they were doing the main task using the MS DOM. The users were not against the help. They were against being interactive. Clippy was the guy at a party who says, "You look like you need help done." So, no, Clippy, that's my moves and this stop, and I don't need your help there, right? So we all grew in our own ways, and Clippy needed to understand that the way we use the product is probably different from the other users, but then I want to use it that way itself, right? So I don't want a prescriptive solution from Clippy there as well. So while we look at these field case studies, I'd like you to do and understand how should we solve the problem statement that we are coming up with, right? So what do you do instead? You channel your inner detective. The best UX minds are part psychologists, part data nerds, and part therapists as well, if you consider. So you ask good questions to observe patterns, you let the users talk and you listen to the users altogether. You don't assume, you don't just assume things around, and you actually look for evidence like a detective. So great detectives, they don't say it's, I think it's the butler who did committed the murder, right? Rather, what they say is it's the butler, and here's why. They always have some reason to support their statement. So as designers, when we are solving the problems, we come up with the solutions. We should always be aware of the context of the users. We should always be aware of the actual problem that we are planning to solve. It goes same for the designers as well. Your why is your secret weapon. Why are we solving this, right? So there could be multiple layers of the problem statement that you're solving, and to go to the right problem statement is very important. Now let's look at another case study. We looked at Gisero, we looked at Clippy. Those products failed, right? And then it's not always the case that most of the products fail out there as well. There are a few good case studies as well to follow. One of such case studies would be Airbnb. Slide takes a little time to load. However, I hope that you are able to see the Airbnb slide here. So Airbnb, when it was new, it was struggling early on. They had the tech, they had listings, they had figured out payments, they had photos of the places that could stay, but the bookings were low. And unlike any other company, they tried and invest to understand the actual problem. What's happening there? Why aren't the people booking the stays that are listed in Airbnb, right? So they conducted lots of user research. They talked to the users, and they tried and then understand that people were like, no, I'm not staying in some stranger's house, right? Those thought process of the users needed to be changed. When they dived deeper, they understood that it was not the UI polish that they needed. Rather, it was trust. Users' trust on the stays, users' trust on the host that were hosting those places, and the users' trust on the platform like Airbnb, right? The internet was new, and people were still taking time to trust on the internet. So what Airbnb did was very interesting. They added reviews of the stays there as well, from coming up from the real users who actually stayed in those places. They added host profiles, talking more about the host and people started seeing host as a person and not just as a profile there out there in the internet. And then they also added ID verification for the people who wanted to stay and for the host as well. Now, by doing such things, suddenly the strangers felt safer and the bookings grew. So, what do we learn from this? Sometimes the real problem is emotional, it's invisible, and maybe not always tangible to think from the UI perspective, right? But once you solve that, design clicks into the place. So while we were learning from good case studies, bad case studies out there in the market, how can we as designers go ahead and solve this problem in this protothon and perhaps later as well? So now let's gear you up. You already have problem statements by now, but how do you stress test it? How do you uncover the real ones? So here's your toolkit. The five whys, the problem tree, how my tree, and job stories. Most of you might have heard of some of these topics altogether, but then this could be new to some of you as well. So we'll deep dive a little into all of these problem statements, all of these toolkits as well. And each of these helps you to dig deeper. They're simple, fast, and perfect for design hackathons when you don't have months to do the user research. So let's break each one down one by one. Let's start with the most basic one, the five whys. The five whys is basically you being an annoying toddler, asking why again and again. But guess what? It works. So let's say the users drop off during the checkout. And when you ask the first why, you could come up with some understanding that the page is slow and this is why the users are dropping off at the checkout. Is that enough? Probably not, right? So maybe you ask why again. During the second why, you might learn that there are too many assets in the checkout page, which is causing the page to load slow. Asking the question again, probably you get to understand that things are not optimized here. Ask it why. Maybe the team did not prioritize this thing. And why did the team did not prioritize? It's because no one's tracking the metric here, right? So if you actually try and ask these questions again and again into the problem statement that you are solving today, you'll be getting into that actual layer of the cause of the problem statement. And that is where we need the solution, right? As soon as you ask the five different whys in this example, and you discover that it was not a UI problem, it was a team priority problem altogether, right? Because there were too many assets and we did not prioritize that. And based on the metrics that we go ahead and track, we need to prioritize things about the checkout page, and then the team would go ahead and optimize and work on the asset. And ultimately, the page won't take very long to load. And what would happen is people won't drop off during the checkout page. So that's how the whole layer of the whys help you to solve the actual problem statement, probably lying beneath all this surface level problem statement. So once you understand this is the moment when you go, oh, because it's not about fixing the button color. It's not about making performance a team goal. That's the detective's aha moment that we are looking for. So today, when you go ahead and work on your problem statement, I hope you get your aha moment very soon in the time. So you're not just diagnosing the UX symptoms here, you're identifying the disease beneath all the symptoms that we're seeing outside. So don't stop at the first answer. Don't stop at the first why that you ask. Try and ask those questions again and again so that you uncover the actual layer of the problem that you're solving. Apart from five whys, there are many other tools that I already talked about. One of them is the problem tree. Sometimes the problem is messy, multi-layered, right? So that's where the problem tree happens. So the trunk in this tree is your central issue. The roots are the hidden causes, and the branches are visible symptoms. You can draw it out. For those complex problems, you can use a Miro board, or you can use a PicJam. There are many tools out there, whiteboarding tools out there. If not, you can go the conventional route, start drawing these things on a piece of paper as well. So draw it out, and then you'll see the patterns. Maybe performance issues all tie back to how the content is authored, or maybe user confusion links to the onboarding pages. It's not just a diagram. It's a conversation starter with your team. So once you start putting all the layers of problem statements, all the layers of what causes them, all the layers of what do you think are the effects of those problem statements, you can start a conversation with your team. You can visualize all of them together in form of a tree. There are three different layers. Put it up. You start debating with your team. Why do you think these are the effects and how are they related to it? It helps you rethink the problem statement again. The most favorite one that I have, that I also use a lot in our industry, and coming from a very B2B background, how might we? So it turns grumbling into dreaming. Take problems like users hate our app, right? And then try and reframe it. How might we make the user smile when they open our app? Now you have a pause, right? You know what to solve for. Or how might we reduce friction in first use? So that's the format of how might we is here. So we start with asking the question, how might we write the goal so that, and then we add the desired outcome. So it's playful, it's open-ended, but then still grounded in reality. A well-written how might we sets you up for dozens of good ideas without prescribing the solution too soon, without jumping to one of the solution. It helps you explore the problem statement, being more open, and where you also add your goal, you also add the desired outcome that you want to achieve while solving the problem, right? So this becomes a key design process that enables you to go ahead to the ideation stage and think about the problem statement again, ideate, and come up with lots of ideas to how to solve that statement that you're thinking of. Very much similar to how might we is our job stories. And here's the secret. Real users don't actually wake up thinking, I am a 25-year-old with disposable income, blah, 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 and shit, like the way we write the personals in detail, right? They think I'm late and I need to rebook a cab fast. So that's the problem that we are trying to solve, right? Based on our problem statement that we're looking at. So that's what job stories also capture. Context, motivation, and expected outcome. For example, when I'm rushing to a meeting, I want a cab in two taps so that I'm not late. That's the problem. That's the format that we also use. When, and then we add the situation, then we add I want to, motivation, so I can, expected outcome. I'll repeat the example again. When the situation would be I'm rushing to a meeting, I want a cab in two taps, so I'm not late, right? So this definition, this is also called user stories by many of the designers out there. So this user stories or this job stories clearly identifies what are what's the situation where the user would be using the application that you're building, what are their motivation, and what do they expect out of the application that you're designing. Suddenly, you're not designing for young professionals. Suddenly, you're not designing for students. And you're actually designing for the urgency. And that's powerful, right? For this protothon, when you have very limited time period, think about rather than deep diving into the user personas and thinking more about from their perspective how a young professional would think or how a student would think, you actually think about the actual problem that they are facing in that scenario, right? So any problem coming without the context is incomplete. So when you add this context, like the situation, like the motivation, and the expected outcome by the users, it helps you understand what you are building and it helps you ideate better on this. So I won't keep you long. I'll probably go ahead and wrap up my talk so that you have lots of time to focus on the problem statement that you are trying to solve today. Um, that being said, so here's your detective manifesto, right? Don't assume, rather ask. Ask why, and don't just ask what or how. Why is really important, where you ask the question and it helps you uncover the actual problem lying beneath that. Don't jump into the pixels, rather dig into the context. A good problem framing will lead to a better set of ideas that you want to be going ahead with while solving the problem, right? And I'd say don't chase the flashy fix. Find the real friction, find the hidden friction why the users are facing the problem that you're trying to solve. So designing is solving, but solving the right problem, that's what separates good from the great, right? And now that you have got the toolkit to do that, I hope that you would be able to solve the problems and come up with great, interesting ideas that we'll be able to see that tomorrow. And with that, I would go ahead and wrap up. And thank you for being such sharp minds today. I hope you leave this room thinking less like designers and more like detectives. But most importantly, have fun through the design process. And let's hear your question if you have any, or even better, tell me what problem statements are you solving at this Protothon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. That was a very insightful talk. A lot of the things you presented are really, really helpful, especially as people are right now coming up with their problem statements and really understanding like what are we trying to solve. Um, let's see, are there any questions? Seems like Zosh has a question. How did you make the illustrations?
The illustrations are mostly the scribbles that I came up with on my iPad. So yeah.
Are there any
Some
other?
of them are images like Juicero or the Clippy, the example that I used from the internet. I won't take credit for
No. Those illustrations are very impressive. Those are really cool.
you. I'm glad that you liked it.
Are there any other questions? Feel free to unmute or drop them in the chat. We also have the Q&A section of Zoom open, so if you want to add it in there. Seems like someone has a question. What does a day-to-day look like in the life of a product designer?
Interesting. Okay. Um, I cannot say for everyone, but I can answer that for myself. So working in a very niche domain in B2B, there are multiple problem statements that we'll be solving at the same time, right? And probably of different scale of products. Uh, some of them would be very deep, very priority for the company as well, and some maybe non, um, a very little problem as well to solve for. So what we generally do is designers talk a lot and collaborate a lot with the stakeholders. When I say stakeholders, again, there'd be huge set of people. Maybe you don't meet them every day, but then very frequently. The user researcher that you're working with, the product manager that you're working with, your design team you're working with, right? There are, even in the design team, there are people would be the content writer, the content designer. There would be uh, design system people handling those design systems as well. So there's lots of conversation that we actually do with them. And design is, I would say, is not a solo job. You cannot work in a silo. So you need to talk to people. You need to understand the product better, and apart from these kind of researches, what you also do is a lot of desk research. Try and understand the product. Try and understand the domain that you're trying solving in that problem statement as well. Then comes lots of ideations. I use pen and paper, but then there are people who directly go ahead and sketch on iPads or any other digital tools as well. Nowadays, we have lots of digital tools to solve for that as well. And in my lifestyle, I'd say Figma would be 10% of the whole design process, right? It's the most of the design process is not the tangible outcome that we see. It's actually going ahead and deep diving into the problem statement and understanding the users, understanding the actual problem that we are trying to solve, and lots of ideations, lots of sharing of ideas amongst the collaborators, and then going ahead with the customers and talking to them. The thing that we're planning to solve is actually solving the problem for them. And once the designs are delivered, we go back and look at the data and do the analytics to try and understand if the users are actually using the product the way we intended them to use. If not, we come back and start tweaking on that again. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Another question that we have is, what design processes do you follow at Cisco, or do you have How Might We sessions at Cisco?
Okay. So generally we go ahead with the double diamond process, the design process in at Cisco, and probably that's the standard across many of the industries out there. In terms of design process, the way I mentioned about the problem statement, most of the things would overlap again, so I won't bore you with the same details again and again. There's lots of research. We generally begin with user research, talking to the customers and trying and understand and discover what the problem statement that the product manager has come up with. And we try and look into that. We ask lots of whys there as well. We ask lots of how might we's, and then reframe the problem statement. Many times what happens is the problem statement that we come up with is not deep enough because when we came up with, we didn't have a good understanding or a deep understanding of the domain that we're trying to solve or the subdomain that we're trying to solve there. Once we go ahead, we do the customer research, we do the market research, we do the user research, we and try and understand the actual problem that we're solving there, and then we go ahead and reframe that problem statement. After that, once we have defined the problem, once we know who are we building for and what are we building for, we divide the things into phases and try and build the MVP which is achievable in the time commitment that we are looking forward to. And then comes the ideations again, the way I talk to you, collaborating with the user researchers, with the other stakeholders throughout, and then we go ahead and with the final delivery of that product, or at least that phase of that product that we are building. And do we have how might we sessions at our company? I won't say that we always go ahead with how might we sessions, depending on the type of problem that we're solving. There are many tools that we use. Most of them are like how might we is asking 5 why questions, a problem tree, and depending on the type of problem that we're solving, we choose the toolkit there. How might we's are generally there towards the beginning of the session. Generally, there's one designer leading one of the part of the project there. So that designer comes up with those how might we's, and not in silo again, working with the user researcher, working with the product manager. Now, those how might we's are then shared with the broader design team as well, so that everyone's on the same page. And we ideate on that how might we's again. We try and understand more about that domain from the other designers or who is working on similar domains out there to understand the product better and understand the problem statement better. So yes, I would say there are some sessions like that, but then it's not specifically for how might we's. How might we's becomes a part of those research sessions, those sharing sessions. We have sharing critique here. So based on that, we do go ahead and solve those problems like that. Right. I hope
Great.
that answers your question.
Yeah. I think there's another comment in the chat, um, asking for feedback on their How Might We question.
Okay, let me go ahead and open the chat here. So Belinda says we're focusing on the city prompt. This is our how much we state, how much we make the citizens feel more confident that their complaints are being resolved by providing one platform to report and get updates on their and other citizens' complaints. Could we get some feedback? I think you are on the right track, Belinda, but then this is great to start with, right? Right now, what I see, there are many phases within the same how might be question, right? So what you could also do is you do not need to solve a single how might be. What you could go ahead and do is break this how might be into smaller how might be, right? So if I go back to that slide for the how might be, here, right? So there's a goal that we're solving for and the desired outcome that we're solving for, right? So we did not populate all the outcomes and all the goals in the single question. What we can do is we can, in fact, go ahead and write five different how might be's and then ideate better. So that would help us break the bigger problem statement into smaller chunks and then look at what are the goals and the desired outcome of that goal as. And then, when we have divided the bigger problem into a small problem, it's easier for us to ideate better on those smaller chunks rather than solving everything together. So I think maybe that is something that you could go ahead and try. Break down the bigger problem into smaller ones, and then try and see how are you achieving the goal, how using the ideation that you are going ahead and doing that. Does that help, Belinda, or do you have any follow-up questions on that?
Great. Okay, I think she does have a follow-up question.
Okay. Is it okay to have more than one hour? I think? Yes, we can. Don't, but then there's a limit of the number of questions that you would want to add based on the type of problem that you're solving. Um, 10 how much fees would be too many how much fees again. One could be very less as well. So be mindful of how many how much fee questions are you asking. Maybe 4 to 5 is good enough for this protothon. And for other problem statements as well, depending on, again, how much time do you have to solve them. So from the question that you shared, probably can be broken down into 3 or 4 sub questions of how might we, and then you can go ahead and ideate on those smaller questions. Tackle one problem at a time rather than tackling one to tackle. So yes, I in a single sentence, yes, I would encourage to have more than one how might be, probably 3 and 4 in this case.
Awesome. Well, if there's any questions, feel free to ask them. Um, okay. Well, in that case, I also have a question myself, but so I know that when we're talking about how might we questions, oftentimes like we always like end up inputting our own bias and our own sort of like experience that we bring just because we haven't really started the research yet and we're just trying to formulate. So how do you recommend going about crafting a how might we question that doesn't um really like have our bias in it?
Great question again. What I generally do in this case is take ample of time to do the desk research or to the users and gather any insights from the previous researchers that would help, right? And then we generally, when we come up with how much fees, there are multiple how much fees that we come up with as individual designers. The product manager in that case would also come up with their own how much fees, right? So what we do then is what we can also try out in this protothon is every member can come up with their sets of how much fees and then talk to each other about why they feel this is relevant, and then based on the research that they did and keeping away our bias itself, our experience itself. So we need to remember that we might not be the users, right? There are other users, actual users, and would be thinking of the problem statement and the solution very differently from us. So this is where discussion helps, putting away our biases and talking to each other, and then basing on the research that we have done so far and that whole team has done so far, we shortlist the top how my trees again, probably 3 and 4, or maybe 5 to 6, depending on what you're solving. And then we go ahead and solve the problem going ahead and ideate on those problem statements again. So this how my trees generally come in the defining stage, right? So if we look at the double diamond process, which starts from discover, which is a very divergent design process. There we actually invest our time into the research. Once we have done our research, we can and converge together and try and define the problem statement. This is where we define the problem statement by multiple hierarchies there. So I would expect, it's a little difficult to put our personal biases away, but then that generally comes with practice most of the times.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. Um, okay, I think Belinda has one last follow-up. Do
Yeah.
our solutions need to answer all the how might we's?
Maybe, maybe not. Because you might come up with lots of things to solve for, right? Given that you have very limited time period right now, or even in the industry, what we generally do is we are not able to solve all the problems together. What we do is divide them into multiple phases of product releases as well. So how might we again will help you to prioritize which problems to solve first, which do you think are more relevant to solve for, and then we could go ahead and start solving on those things. This protothon within 2 days probably won't be good enough time for you to come up with the perfect solution because design is an ever-going process, right? So there could be multiple things that you won't be able to solve in this protothon as well. But then it will help you understand what are the next steps that you might take after you come up with this MVP that you are building together.
Great. And I think we have one last question. In fast-paced settings like the Protothon or tight sprints, how do you know when you've done enough research to confidently define the problem without overanalyzing or delaying the progress?
Great question. I think one of the key uh, thing is to manage the time curve, right? So even in the industry, when we get the problem statement and we know that we need to release this, and we have certain deadlines there as well, very much similar to Protothon, but then probably we have a little more, bit more months there. So what we generally do is we divide our time into the different design phases and into the different processes that we want to invest our time into. So there could be some time that we want to invest into the research in this protothon as well, so that we don't actually have very less time for ideation and coming up with the final prototype that we are planning to build. So what we do is, and I would also suggest you to start with time management first. Plot the charts. Who's good in what? How are you dividing the task? What would you like to focus on in within the team? What do you bring to the table within the team as well? And then try and break the whole time frame that you have from now to the submission or to the final presentation, and then break those time intervals into the different design processes that you want to invest in, and then limit yourself to that. And while you do that, I understand that if you say that I would invest 4 hours into research, that 4 hours might get stretched as well. So always have buffer between the different design processes. So maybe an hour of buffer, 2 hour of buffer, depending on what kind of problem that you're solving again. So those buffers help you to have to follow it very neatly again. So everything that you expect now for the next few hours might not work throughout as well. So have buffers in those time management and try and stick to that plan that you have created for yourself. A little buffer here and there works, but then don't exaggerate that so that because you need time to come up with a prototype. You need time to come up with good ideations as well there as well.
Great. Well,
Awesome.
I don't see any other questions. So before we go ahead and drop and end this talk, a few final reminders. Um, okay, there we go. So we have talks going on throughout the Protothon. So as you guys are working on your projects, make sure to check our website, check the Protothon page to see more about what other people are talking about. We have one again at 2:30. And so if you're interested, go ahead and use the same link to join. A few final reminders. This session's recording will be shared with everyone to your emails. So don't worry if you want to go back and reference anything that Shiva talked about today, you guys can view the recording. Second thing, please share feedback about this talk and about how everything went via a survey that we'll send to your emails as well. And lastly, if you enjoyed this session, like I'm pretty sure many of you did, share your experience on LinkedIn or on Instagram. And when you do, we'd really appreciate if you could tag Shiva, DubsTech, and Design Buddies, just so that we can spread the word about such an awesome talk that Shiva gave today. If there aren't any other questions, thank you so much to everyone for joining today. And thank you so much, Shiva, for sharing all about how might we questions and really looking at design through a problem-solving detective lens. It was really helpful for me, and I'm sure it was helpful for everyone else.
I hope that helps to everyone, and then looking forward to great submissions.